This morning, we got to hear the farewell speech of my friend Lamar Alexander. He's a fantastic speaker and legislator. It's been an honor to serve with him and to learn from him. Now you get to hear from the accountant. I rise today to give my farewell speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate. It's been an honor of a lifetime to serve the great people of Wyoming in this position for the last 24 years. I've really enjoyed being a senator. Not for the title, not for the recognition, and certainly not for the publicity. I love solving problems for folks in Wyoming and America. I like working on legislation. It might shock those who know me, but I never intended to get into politics. While I always had great respect for those who serve in public office, it wasn't my calling when I left college. But over 50 years ago, I joined a young men's leadership training group known as the JCs. At a state convention in Cody, I spoke about the value of leadership in communities. The keynote speaker was Al Simpson, who would go on to serve 3 terms in the United States Senate. After I gave my pitch on the importance of leadership training, Senator Simpson did his usual fascinating and humorous speech and then took me aside and said, "I don't even know what party you're in, but it's time you put your money where your mouth is on this leadership stuff and get into politics. That town you live in, Gillette, needs a mayor." My wife Diana and I had only moved to Gillette a few years earlier. The town was facing a crisis as the discovery of oil and gas and coal turned it into a boomtown. The population started to skyrocket and city services were not keeping up. On the way home from that Cody meeting, while my wife was driving, I told her what Senator Simpson had said and that I was thinking maybe I should run for mayor. It must have come as quite a shock because she ended up swerving into the borrow pit and then coming back up onto the road. We ended up talking about it seriously for the 4 hours that it took to drive back to Gillette and thought of a lot of things that needed to be done to make a difference in our town. I was new to the community. I was just 29 years old. But I thought that Gillette was in need of a budget, agendas, and planning, not the most exciting topics on any people's attention. I ran anyway, and I did win. Nearly 5 decades later, having served as mayor, having served in the state house, having served as a state senator, and then as a U.S. senator, I still find myself motivated by the urge to help my community and my country. I also find myself still pushing those same 3 ideas that I did when I first ran for mayor: budgets, agendas, and planning. I keep finding myself wanting to help solve problems. Once you embrace that responsibility, it's hard to ever ignore it again. I have found that many of my colleagues in Congress tend to feel the same way. The Senate is a very different place than when I arrived in 1997, and it's a very different place than it was in 1789 when the very first Senate met. But over all those years, it's been a place for folks rising to the challenge of being a leader. We are looking to make our communities and country a better place. We might not always agree on what the solutions are, but we can respect each other for working to find one. Over the years, I've learned a great deal from those around me. Just like I listened to Senator Al Simpson all those years back there, I've tried to keep an open mind and learning from others. And now that my time in the Senate is coming to a close, I'd like to pass along some of the lessons I was taught and some I learned the hard way, in the hope that it may be useful for my colleagues working to get things accomplished in the Senate and for anybody who wants to be a leader in their community. In my office, we have a mission statement. It reads, "We have been given a sacred trust to work for our families, grandparents, and grandchildren. We will respect the wisdom of those before and the future of those to follow. We will discharge this trust through our legislative policy, our constituent services, and the way we treat each other, guided by these 3 principles: doing what's right, doing our best, and treating others as they wish to be treated. These last three principles are advice my mom gave me often, and they remain my core values. Every member of my staff is given that mission statement when they start, and we rely on it to remind us why we are here and how we should act. It isn't just a saying, it's a way to work, a way to build trust, and a way to govern. These values are not always easy to live by. We're all human, and we all struggle to live up to these ideals we set for ourselves, but that's why we call them ideals. I believe these are values we can all agree on, and by remembering the values we share, we can work together to tackle tough problems and find shared solutions. Do what's right's a great slogan, but you might ask what it means at a practical level. People see a mess in Washington, so how do we actually make progress? I believe it involves focusing on common ground over compromise, especially when it comes to legislating. People sometimes think that compromise is the answer. I think it means I give in to something I don't like, and you give in to something you don't like, and we both wind up with something neither of us like. It's not legislating. When it comes to legislating, often the best way to get something done that everyone can agree on is to leave out the things you don't agree on and focus on what you can get done. That's why I suggest my 80% tool. Generally speaking, people can talk civilly on 80% of the issues. It's only about 20% of the issues that we find real contention. Now, even picking a single issue out of the 80%, you might still find disagreement. But once again, you can probably focus on 80% of the issue that you can agree on. It's all about focusing on what you can get done and not focusing on the points of disagreement, the weeds of debate that have choked issues. Or to say it another way, it's all about what you leave out. Former Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts and I used this tool when we led the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee together, and it worked great. It worked even though we were on complete opposite sides of the political spectrum. I once showed Senator Kennedy an article that mentioned how unusual it was for the most conservative senator and the third most liberal senator to work together, to which he said, "So who's ahead of me?" We were able to get legislation passed that others had been trying to do for years. Here's how we started working together. When I first got to the Senate, I wanted to change some things with OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety. Senator Kennedy was, at the urging of my predecessor, Senator Simpson, did let me sit down and take him through the bill a section at a time. That's something we always did in the Wyoming legislature. When we marked up the bill in committee, Senator Kennedy said, "In all my years in the Senate, I've never had anybody take me through a bill a section at a time, but I'm still going to have to vote against it." It still got out of committee, but later he called me about a safety bill he'd been working on for over a decade, a bill to save nurses and medical janitors from accidental needle sticks, and asked if I'd take a look at it. I did. The biggest suggestion that I gave was to leave out a couple of the small parts that had been jamming up the bill. The bill passed the Senate and the House unamended and was signed. And now you see needle stick disposals in restrooms and all sorts of places. And the issue has never been had to be readdressed. Later, I became the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Chair, and Senator Kennedy was the ranking member. We used the 80% tool. We were able to get 35 bills through the HELP Committee in the 109th Congress. 27 of them made their way to the President's desk and were signed into public law. And in between, we were able to report out 352 nominations for consideration by the full Senate. So here's how the 80% tool worked. At the beginning of each year, each of us made a list of the issues the committee should do. We compared lists. We made an effort to argue some to be on both lists. Then we worked on the ones on both lists. We usually had duplication of about 80% of the issues. Then we could pick out any issue and work on it usually agreeing on 80% of that issue. If we couldn't find a new way to do the part that had been argued for years, we simply left it out, believing that 80% finished is better than 20% that only makes the press. This is the 80% tool, and it's where all of our energy, attention, and talents could be focused. If we just work on the 20% that we don't agree on and never will agree on, we'll only generate headlines about how hard we are working with nothing actually getting done. Just gridlock. When the news comes on, if we're here in the chamber arguing and bickering and getting nothing done, we're focusing too much on the 20%. If people do not see much of us, that means we're taking on the 80% and making progress without headlines and often with unanimous consent. What we were really talking about is working together. That's what the heart of the 80% tool is. Oftentimes people say what we need is more bipartisanship, and there is very practical reason for that. In the Senate, you can't get anything done without working with the other side, unless one party has 60 votes or more, which is rare. And even with 60 votes from one party, the bills that party passes when they have a supermajority often are flawed. It turns out that when we work together, we can create a better bill than when we just try to do it alone or force others to accept our ideas. That's why success is not really about compromise. It's really about what you leave out or finding a way to accomplish it doing a mutually agreeable new way. We used to take the people that had similar amendments and send them off to see if they could come up with one amendment. And quite often they could, and it was fascinating when they came back, they said, "It was my idea." And when all of them report to you that it was their idea, you know that you've got enough votes to pass it. And that's why success is not really about compromise. It's about what you leave out or finding a third way to come up with a mutually agreeable goal. Here are a few key steps that I use to find that common ground to pass legislation. First, find someone from the other side of the aisle who likes to legislate. Second, discover and agree on common goals. Third, consult with stakeholders that will or could affect the changes being discussed. Fourth, hold roundtables instead of hearings. With hearings, each side beats up on the other's witness with clever stump the professor type questions. At a roundtable, people who have actually done something on a policy share their real life experiences. And finally, you set aside the part of the issues you can't agree on for another day. Now you'll have a bill that has a good chance of being passed and signed into law. That's the heart of the 80% tool. This way of working also ensures that we can disagree without being disagreeable. There's a lot of vitriol in our politics and our world right now, but you can stay true to what you believe in without treating others badly. Nothing gets done when we're just telling each other how wrong we are. Just ask yourself, has anyone ever really changed your opinion by getting in your face and yelling at you or saying how wrong you are? Usually that doesn't change hearts or minds. That might make the attacker feel better in the moment, but it doesn't do much for getting anything accomplished. Following the 80% tool will not get you notoriety. It won't get you fame, it won't get you headlines. Most media coverage requires blood in the water. However, the ability to work among your peers using this method can and will move us forward and get things done. This tool is only successful if we're actually working on passing legislation together, and that means letting the Senate work as it was intended. One of the best ways to do that is to allow the members of each committee to actually take time to craft bills. The committees are where the experts are and where I think some of the best work gets done. I've already made it clear that I don't think hearings are overly useful and are often wasted on collecting sound bites for the evening news. Instead, we should be encouraging committees to give their members more say in crafting legislation and working together on best solutions. If you look at bills that pass with strong bipartisan support, they are usually because flaws were ironed out in committee. Legislation is oftentimes at its best when it has taken time in committee, is being hashed out until it's ready for prime time. Now, you might not always be able to get everyone on board, but if you've done it right, you should see strong bipartisan support. Sometimes this also means letting others take credit for your ideas. An old salesman trick is to convince other ideas that your good idea was really their good idea. Don't let your vanity stand in the way of getting the job done. Too often in the modern Senate, legislation is rushed out of committee to the Senate floor, and then once it hits the Senate floor, both sides try to prevent amendments. But the process of allowing amendments and debates is a core component of how the Senate was designed to operate. Without it, the Senate can get gummed up, the gears can get jammed. Without the fresh air that new ideas and legitimate debate brings, tensions can rise as senators feel unable to make progress. The difficulty is that each party is so worried about the next election, looking to hold on to the majority, that everybody is either trying to force the other side to take politically perilous votes or trying to avoid taking those votes themselves. No matter which party is in charge, we wind up ending blocking amendments and shying away from allowing legislation to be altered on the floor of the Senate. And usually those tough votes don't really make any difference. It might help if members made it clear to leadership they'd be willing to take some tough votes in return for more chances to amend major legislation on the floor. People might be less likely to demand votes on a poison pill or messaging designed to put the other party in a tough spot if they knew they could face the same treatment. In the end, the onus is on the members of the Senate, on us, to take on a responsibility to work together in return for a chance to pass legislation. I suggest that amendments should have to have 60 votes. If it were so bad that it needed a filibuster, the 60 votes would be required to end that, but that takes about 3 days. And so many have been willing to allow their amendment to have a 60-vote threshold, and if it was strong enough, it passed anyway. I also ask you to avoid comprehensive. Comprehensive bills makes it so large that everyone can find a reason to vote against it. Senator Alexander is a big promoter of step-by-step. That's taking a piece of legislation and solving it, and then taking the next step and solving it, and so on. This practical solution would avoid passing comprehensive legislation. Comprehensive legislation is usually a byproduct of compromise, not common ground, and often ends up being incomprehensible. Giant bills that try to do everything usually end up with too many unintended consequences and include a litany of unrelated pieces of legislation that are merely hitching a ride because otherwise they would never be able to stand on their own merits. These Christmas tree bills are often designed so that if you vote against it, you'll be voting against some key legislation for your constituents. Once again, the ugly nature of compromise over common ground is clear. Now, a simple solution I've proposed would be to pass more bills as individual pieces of legislation. That's step by step. In Wyoming, bills have to be focused on a single subject, and all amendments need to be relevant. In the past, I've introduced a bill that would require that here, but it never was really treated seriously. To talk on a little different article, my favorite article of the Constitution is Article 5. And the reason it assures that all states will have equal representation in the Senate. And that can't even be changed by a constitutional Congress. And since I come from one of those low population states, this is very important to us. Sometimes we're criticized for being overrepresented in the Senate. We have 2 senators, the same as California and New York and Texas. But in this argument of unfair representation for states, we find the same inherent issues we do with the filibuster. Our government was not set up to be majority ruled by population alone. Our founders, through their own debate, were able to understand the risk of pure democracy and the benefits of a federalist system, where ideas were represented not just by population, but by regions and shared cultures. Wyomingites deserve to have their cultural say in our system protected against the majority. We're all in the United States of America. The Senate represents more than just the people. To protect the individuality of the states, of the culture of those who live in the regions of the country less populated, it also represents states that founded our federalist system. Of course, at that time, several of them had little population. Now, I've covered a lot of ground, but for my last piece of advice, I would call on my colleagues to recognize that it's time to formally allow electronics on the floor of the United States Senate. It's an issue near and dear to my heart, and one I think will help to work in the Senate. It's clear that anyone who watches C-SPAN, that all of us are already breaking the spirit of the law, checking our phones on occasion as we walk off or onto the floor. Those devices are often inseparable from our ability to do our work. We rely on them to do almost everything. It's time to make this common sense change, allowing iPads to be used for speeches as long as they're laid on the lectern like a paper speech. And if senators could do some work from their desks like early senators had to do, we would listen to more of the speeches and get something done. I do remember when I brought that one up before that it was covered by, in '97, I thought it was important that we have that use, and Time magazine did a special article on it, and I remember Senator McConnell going to New York City and coming back to report to me that he got in a cab, and the cab driver said, "You're a United States Senator, aren't you?" And of course, he probably was. And the guy said, "So when are you going to let the guy from Wyoming have his computer on the floor?" So Senator McConnell told me if I'd lobbied it down to cabbies that it was time to do it, but we still haven't done it. As we move forward, of course, our country has no shortage of problems we need to address. Some are out of our control, but many are of our own making. If my experience over the years has taught me anything, it's that we'll never be able to tackle these challenges unless we find common areas of agreement first and work to solve these problems together. I hope everyone listening, especially my colleagues in the Senate, remember the core values I spoke of today. Do what's right, do your best, treat others as they wish to be treated. I truly believe that if we adhere to these ideals, the world will be a better place for our children and grandchildren. I want to again thank the people of Wyoming for giving me the opportunity to serve them. I also want to thank my colleagues and friends who supported me over the years. I want to thank all the amazing staff that I've had over the years in my personal office, in the DC office, in my state offices in Wyoming, and my staff on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and on the Budget Committee. Over the years, I've gotten to work with incredible staff that have made it possible to do more than a senator by him or herself could ever do. Thank you for working so hard over the years. I also want to give the most thanks to my family and all their support over the years, especially for my wife, Diana. It's been a long journey since I told you, Diana, that I was thinking of running for mayor. You've supported me more than anyone can truly comprehend, and in no uncertain terms, I couldn't have done it without you. It's been more than 50 amazing years together, and I look forward to our next adventure. Mr. President, I yield the floor.